Greetings, APUSH scholars. For our review of Unit 4, looking at the review sheet from top to bottom, we're basically looking at the James Madison, James Monroe years in the War of 1812, the Missouri Compromise, Monroe Doctrine, the rise of early industry, and some Supreme Court cases. Reasons for the War of 1812 include the British interfering with our trade with Europe. We're in the long-running wars between England and France, involving the French Revolution years and the Napoleonic years. We're making money trading with both the Brits and the French, and under the Orders of Council, the Brits are prohibiting trade with Napoleon, with France, with any place controlled by him. And the Brits are taking our ships, they're taking our cargoes, and they are kidnapping our sailors and forcing them into the British Navy. And this is called impressment. Furthermore, we're accusing the Brits of arming the Indians on the frontier. Think of the rebellion led by Tecumseh. And earlier, Jefferson had tried to avoid war by the 1807 Embargo Act, which banned trade with all other countries. You have the 1809 Non-Intercourse Act, which narrows the ban on trade just with England and France. And Macon's Bill number 2 said that we would stop trade only with the country that refused to acknowledge our neutrality, and that we would begin trading with a country that would acknowledge our freedom of the seas. And the opponents of this war are the New Englanders, the Federalists, who see war as being more destructive to their prosperity and income and trade than the actual seizure of ships and sailors by the Brits, which is a little bit haphazard, a little bit random. And the declaration of war, approximately 60% of the country is against the war, and this would be New England/Federalists. And none of the New England states in the declaration of war vote for this war, which leads to the Hartford Convention in 1815. Towards the end of the war, in Hartford, there's a meeting of this group of disaffected Federalists, and there's some talk of secession. But more significantly, there are some constitutional amendments which are proposed. None of them pass, of course, but the amendments include a 2/3 vote on both sides of Congress to declare war, 2/3 vote of both sides of Congress to allow in new states. One of the things that frustrated the Federalists is these new states that are carved out of the Louisiana Purchase basically have become Republican states, voting against their interests. You also have the proposal that the government can't embargo trade, and there's this hostility towards the Virginians, and remember, I think it's like 7 out of 8 elections, Virginians have won. Think of Washington, we skip over Adams, think of Jefferson, and think of Madison, Monroe. These are all Virginians, and that there won't be 2 presidents from the same state in a row and a limit of a one-term presidency. So the Hartford Convention has these amendments which basically nothing happens with them, but it shows this disagreement with the Republican government, which has declared war against their interests. And Tecumseh does get beaten at the Battle of Tippecanoe by William Henry Harrison, who later is going to ride this victory into the White House after the Martin Van Buren presidency. The Treaty of Ghent ends this war on the terms of what's called status quo antebellum. This is just simply going back to the way things were before the war. No agreement of the Brits to do anything which they weren't doing, other than there's no reason to grab our ships or sailors because Napoleon's been defeated. In 1815, he's shipped off to exile in the South Atlantic. Now, what happens after Madison, when the war is over, James Monroe will be elected in 1816 and in 1820. In 1820, he's going to win all of the electoral votes, and there's going to be, except for one, there's one symbolic vote against him, and the Federalists never have another president after John Adams. So it looks like Washington's advice, his request that America stop partisanship and not divide into factionalism and political parties, looks like this has come true. The feeling is that we've won a war, especially after this tremendous victory at the Battle of New Orleans. Country's filling up with immigrants, industry's booming, immigrants are coming over, we're spreading west, hammering out these borders, for example, with Canada, and we're going to get Spanish Florida in 1819. under Monroe, and so there's these good feelings, although keep in mind there is underneath this air of good feelings some issues such as slavery, the tariff, and the bank. The Monroe Doctrine is a statement against the Europeans that they must leave the newly free Latin Americans, must leave them alone. Latin America is not ground for colonization or recolonization. It's a statement of kind of America will stand for independence in the Western Hemisphere. The Missouri Compromise deals with the state of Missouri, or the territory of Missouri. Petitions come in as the first state on the from the Louisiana Purchase, and they're requesting to come in as a slave state. The Talmadge Amendment will pass the House, not the Senate. The Talmadge Amendment says that any slave child born after statehood will get their freedom at age 25. It's a plan for gradual emancipation. This does not pass. So now we've got this situation where the balance in the Senate will be upset if Missouri becomes another slave state. So the compromise under Henry Clay, who gets the nickname the Great Compromiser, is Missouri will come in as a slave state to be balanced with Maine, which will come in as a free state. And the border for slavery will be 3630, the line of southern Missouri stretched out all the way to the end of the Louisiana Compromise. Early American industry you'll see the textile industry growing after Samuel Slater starts the first textile factory in Pawtucket, Rhode Island. He's going to bring over these textile plans in his head. He's an engineer. And Francis Cabot Lowell is famous for establishing what are called the Waltham Mills in Waltham, Massachusetts. And he's going to look for a docile, compliant, dependable, hardworking labor force. He's going to find it in farm girls. These girls who are looking forward to leaving the drudgery of the farm, living in a dormitory type of situation, making a little bit of money, living with some other girls of same age. Seems kind of a cool thing for them to do. And he's got a ready source of workers, later to be replaced with even cheaper working immigrants. Think the coming potato famine, which is going to send lots of poor Irish desperate to do any work as they step off the boats in America. Cult of domesticity refers to this fact that men, as they leave the home, as industry begins to grow, the home no longer becomes the home, the place where production takes place, but it's moving over to the factory. So you have the sphere for men to work in the factory, where the home becomes the domestic domain of the wife, of the woman. And Republican motherhood is this idea that women should raise little patriotic children, that it's the job of the woman to instill morality and religion and basic democratic values as they're raising their children. Eli Whitney is famous for getting a contract with the military for guns which have interchangeable parts, and he's using precision machinery to make these interchangeable parts. But the big thing is the cotton gin, which is short for the cotton engine, this device which takes the seeds out of cotton, which was a very time-consuming process, made cotton relatively expensive. The cotton gin makes cotton cheap, and there's a huge desire for cotton, a huge need to clear land, and a high demand for slavery. So the cotton gin's impact on the black American community is bad. It makes the demand for slaves great as the country begins to move west into the Louisiana Purchase. And you do have a group of do-gooders who are looking at the problem of slavery, and they're seeing that really their solution is to send freed slaves back to Africa. So you have the American Colonization Society, which will send slaves back to this little piece of land on that hump in Africa, which they will give the name Liberia, as in short for liberty, and Monrovia, the capital, named after James Monroe in this time period. And this will be a African country settled by, there's already an African population there, but those who will be running the country will be the freed American slaves and the descendants of those slaves. Some economic things to be looking at here, what's going on as far as economic growth. Well, you have canal building. You have DeWitt Clinton is sponsoring this canal, which will be built in New York between the Hudson River and the Great Lakes. and specifically Lake Erie. The Erie Canal will be 363 miles long. It's about 4 feet deep, maybe 20 feet wide or so, and you get these flat bottom barges which will move goods between the Great Lakes, which means the Midwest now can be connected by the canal and the Hudson River down to New York. New York will explode with exports from the interior of the country, and similar canals are being built all across the Midwest. John Fitch and Samuel Fulton. John Fitch invents the steamboat, and Samuel Fulton is the first guy to commercialize it. The Claremont is the ship which will take paying passengers, and the big deal here is these long rivers, the Tennessee, the Kentucky, the Cumberland, the Missouri, the Ohio, and the Mississippi. These rivers now, which were sort of a one-way trip, now you can move cargo up, back and forth with relative ease, and this is going to increase trade. Cyrus McCormick is going to invent the mechanical reaper, which is going to allow less workers to produce more crops. You also have the early railroads beginning to expand in the 1820s. You have toll roads, which have this macadam, this kind of crushed gravel surface. So you have an expansion of trade and export goods going down the Mississippi, going through the canals, down to New Orleans and to New York, and American trade is booming. About 2/3 of trade at the time of the Civil War is going to be cotton. There's going to be about 2 million workers in Great Britain who owe their livelihoods to American cotton, providing cloth, or the raw goods to make cloth coming out of British factories. And the American system is a plan to promote American factories. And again, the great compromiser here, who's looking for a way to resolve sectional interests, he says the North should have tariffs to protect American factories, and they should have a bank to help provide cheap credit. What's the South going to get out of this? The South is going to get a purchaser of their cotton, and the South is going to get federal support for building roads and canals to tie them into this interdependent web of economic interdependence. And the West is going to get cheap land and money for roads and canals as well. Some of the borders that are being hammered out during this post-War of 1812 period, you've got the Transcontinental Treaty with Spain. In 1819, Spain is selling Florida to the United States. This is also called the Treaty of Adams-Onis. And this border goes all the way out to the Pacific Ocean. It's considered at the time a favorable border, defining the limits with Spanish/Mexican California and Texas. The Treaty of Rush-Bagot demilitarizes the Great Lakes, and the Convention, or the Treaty of 1818, is setting the border with Canada at the 49th parallel and agreeing to temporarily share administration of the Oregon Territory, which is this vast piece which today would include the Canadian provinces of Alberta and British Columbia, and approximately the American states of Washington, Idaho, Montana, and Oregon. So this huge territory in the West that is sort of put on the back burner for future resolution. And some Supreme Court cases to know: you've got Marbury versus Madison, which establishes judicial review. You've got Dartmouth versus Woodward, which is going to be that case that upholds the sanctity of contracts. McCulloch versus Maryland, or Maryland versus McCulloch. This is the case which upholds the supremacy of the national government, that the states cannot tax the national government because the power to tax is the power to destroy. And you've got Gibbons versus Ogden. This is the case that says only the national government can restrict interstate trade. A state can't grant a monopoly on trade with it in another state. Only the national government can restrict or regulate trade between states. And the Charles River Bridge versus the Warren Bridge. This is a case that expands commerce by permitting a free bridge to exist when a toll bridge had been given a monopoly across the Charles River. So all of these things are promoting economic stability, economic growth, the power of the national government, and certainly the power of the federal courts to say what is and what is not constitutional. So there you have it. There's our drive-by review. Study early, study often, and signing out.